So welcome to the 9:30 call. Kenny and Elizabeth, we're so happy to have you. Our first question for all 9:30 callers is for each of you to tell us a little bit about you, how you came to be in your current role, and then we'd love to hear more about your work.
I'll kick us off, and then I'm going to actually have Kenny do the sharing about our work. So, nice to be with you all. I'm Elizabeth Gaines, and Amy. I'm just back from the West Coast for the week, so it's a 6:30 call to me right now. um,
Good morning indeed, then.
yes, yes. And I will just the one thing I will say about my career, which has been long at this point, is that I was reading. I did my early, direct service work in Madison, Wisconsin years ago, and I was just reading the Capital Times in Madison, and there's a guy who I cajoled and convinced to come and volunteer in my youth program about 30 years ago, who won a legend award this weekend for being like a legend in youth work, and the whole thing just like got me really sort of teary-eyed and thinking about like what it takes to do this kind of work over time, and that he's been at this for 30 years, and he's talented and he's amazing at what he does with young people. So it just sort of took me back to what this is all really about, and that there are
Wow.
really special people doing this work, and we should be honoring them. So that's where I come from, is youth work, and did a lot of state advocacy in my home state of Missouri. And it's a tougher and tougher state to try to do this kind of work in. And then was at the Forum for Youth Investment for a good 14 years, really just working with states and with communities. Did a lot of work with Massachusetts over time. And yeah, formed Children's Funding Project about 7 years ago to really just laser focus in on the money. It felt like through all of the different roles in my career, the money always was a big sort of elephant in the room, whether we were aligning it, whether people were changing what the focus of it was, whether we were, really just trying to track it down. So we are an organization that's meant to fill that gap in the field and try to help people just get a better handle on, what money do we currently have, what money do we need, and where can it come from, and like let's go get it so that we can just do that good work. So that's what we're really about. Kenny, I'll let him go next, and he can sort of kick us off with our slides. But he too, I mean, everybody at Children's Funding Project, we really believe in like having done the work, and so most of our team has been out in the field doing this work, and brings that sort of passion and experience to the table. So Kenny, you want to?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. Kenny Francis. I'm our director of coaching and capacity building. And as Elizabeth shared, I also come from the direct service side of the work. I was a teacher for a long time. I taught threes, fours, and fives. And I'm at the stage of life where I'm starting to get college graduation invites from my former students, which is a really beautiful time in my career. After I taught, I was an administrator. I helped run a childcare center for a bit. And right before I was working with Children's Funding Project, I was doing advocacy work around childcare and other issues in New Orleans for a statewide organization. Really excited to be here with you guys today. I'm going to share my screen in a moment because we did bring some slides. And before I do that, I'd say that we're happy to and will share these slides. And our colleague, Ali, who's our partnerships manager, is also on the call. I know that she'll be dropping some links in the chat about some of the things I'll be referring to. And so if you give me a moment here, I'll pull up these slides and we'll get going. And please, yes, go ahead.
I've seen in chat, Melora said she's so interested in this topic that she's zooming in from vacation. I also have seen names pop up that I know are on vacation, so that's a good sign.
Well, thank you so much all for being here. I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as I can so we can get to questions for folks, since we'll be sending these slides to folks. So let's get this pulled up here. Can everybody see this?
We can.
Okay. Always start with this slide because it's my own child there, Margot, who's our newest staff member. She's 4 months old now. We have flexible work days. She hasn't started her work day. She's still asleep. She doesn't start till 10. But she'll be getting to work soon. As Elizabeth said, we believe that to do this work, you've got to have the triangle of strengthening people, data, money, and we're laser focused on the money side of this work. We do that through a process that we call strategic public financing, which picks up where strategic plans leave off by helping folks put a price tag to their goals and priorities for kids and identifying ways to cover that cost. What is strategic public financing? Well, it's a process that helps communities answer three essential questions. The first question being, how much funding do you already have to support your goals? It's a process we call fiscal mapping, which looks at public funds at federal, state, and local levels. Also, at times, you can look at private philanthropy dollars as well. The second part of the process and the second question is understanding how much does it cost to fund your goals in full, which is a process we call cost modeling, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The third part of the process and the third question is how do you fill the gap between current funding and what you need to fully fund your goals, which is a process we call sourcing additional funding. And in the following slides, we're going to go through a little bit about like what each of those things are, and I'm also going to show some examples. So just a few reasons of why to do a fiscal map. It helps you understand current investments. It helps you align your resources and coordinate, as well as maximize your funding opportunities. And it's sort of a new emergent reason that we've seen over the last couple of years is folks using fiscal mapping to understand the impact of federal relief dollars that came in during the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of what investments look like before relief dollars and what it's looking like during relief dollars. And then now that those dollars are sunsetting, what the realities are looking like as everyone's starting to worry about fiscal cliffs that are coming. We are part of what we're doing with fiscal mapping is looking at the state level because it's so much easier and straightforward to do a local fiscal map if you have a state fiscal map first, which will catalog all of the federal and state funds that you have. This map sort of shows the work that we have done, are doing, and will do around that. Our goal is to fiscal map the entire country. The ones in green are the ones we're currently working on. The ones in orange are the ones that we've already finished, and the ones in red are going to be the next wave of state maps. We haven't done a Massachusetts map yet, but eventually we will get to Massachusetts, and it will be on the list.
And while we are a nonpartisan campaign, our organization, I never thought I would say I want to see Massachusetts red.
We're certainly going to get to, and then I'm actually going to come out of this presentation for a moment and share a different screen because I pulled up a map of a state close to y'all, New Hampshire, that we have done, that I will share an example of what a fiscal map looks like and the different things. While I do that, I'm going to explain that this is one way that you can look at this data when you are setting the parameters and the scope for your fiscal map. You can ask it different questions. This is one way to do it, the way that we've been doing it with state maps. You can get much more, you can ask different questions if you're doing, say, a local map. And I'll give you an example here in a moment.
And just so folks know, we have been talking with Elizabeth and Kenny about working in Massachusetts. So we're in the brainstorming phase. Elizabeth, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say we did actually do, we worked with the Harvard Ed Redesign Lab. I don't know if you know those folks, but we worked with them in 2019 to do a Massachusetts state fiscal map. So we do have that early data on cradle to career investments in Massachusetts that we could always draw upon for future maps.
Great, thanks.
So here I'm going to show you a few different ways to look at this data that was collected, but first to give a little bit of context. For this map, we looked at cradle to career, defined as 0 to 24, and the investments being made supporting children and youth. And we looked at 3 different fiscal years, 2019, 2020, and 2021. So at the top here, you can see that the numbers went up over those 3 years, the federal relief dollars being a huge part of that. In this map, you can look at it by outcome, the different outcome categories within the budget, from employed, safe, connected and supported, healthy, educated. If you've ever looked at a state budget before, usually those are the categories that are bucketed for children and youth. You're also able to look at the funding level of where the funds originated, the federal dollars, the federal relief dollars, the state dollars. This box here would allow you to look at the individual funding streams across the 3 years and the originating source, as well as a description of what they can be used for. This screen would allow you to look at different eligible services and the spending that happened for each of those. So most relevant for this group, I'm just going to click on early care and education slots. And you can see here that it didn't count up to any billions, but if you come down here to this box that looks at the individual streams, you can see that in 2019, New Hampshire had 28 million for slots. in 2020, it had 34 million for slots. And then in 2021, there was a big jump due to federal relief dollars up to $175 million that they had for slots. And that was a combination of state and federal funds. Another way you can look at this is looking at the types, the spending that's happening for different eligible groups of kids. So obviously the biggest budget is what all kids are eligible for, but you can look at eligibility around income status, around special needs, foster care, kids that are in juvenile justice involved youth, and the amounts of money that are being spent on those different categories of kids, as well as the individual funding streams. So if I click on one of these, let's go with income status. What this would show here is the percentage of the budget that is being spent on those specific groups of kids. And then down here is the different funding streams, the level that it came from, and the different eligibility status and the level of intervention for that. So that's another way that you can look at this data. And I think you guys are starting to get the point of like all the different ways you can use this to build an advocacy plan, to really understand the investments that are being made within your communities. This page allows you to look at how funds are being allocated across different age ranges. And so you can see here that New Hampshire is spending the most money on 13 to 17-year-olds. And you can look at that compared to the different populations, the different demographic populations of how many kids are actually in that age range versus what you're expending. And then the next couple of pages would allow you to look at the snapshot of each individual year and those different things I was just talking about, like level of intervention and the outcome category. So this is the 2019 page specifically. This is the 2020 page specifically. This is the 2021 page specifically. And then this page looks specifically at the federal relief funding, what came in, what the different streams were, what it was eligible to be used for, what the amounts were across the 2 years that federal relief dollars are coming in. And you can also look at the programs that were eligible. So again, I can click here and see how much money New Hampshire got specifically for ECE slots across federal relief dollars for 2 years. It was 7 million in 2020, and it was up to 54 million in 2021. This page allows you to look at how the state budget was spending for child and youth relative to the rest of the budget. So you can see that across the 3 years, it steadily increased with the influx of federal dollars, going from 20% of the budget being spent on children and youth in 2019 up to 27% in 21. Another interesting stat to look at is to look at if you pull out K-12 funding from that, it goes down to 8% of their budget is being spent on children and youth, not including the K-12 dollars that goes to schools. Now over here is a snapshot of the per child youth spending across those 3 years, and then looking at that without including K-12 dollars. And so this is an example of all the things that you can look at in a fiscal map and all the different ways that you can use this information to tell a data story. I'm going to very, very briefly just like give you a quick look at a local example. This is Poughkeepsie in New York that can look at similar things of like, and so what they were looking at is federal dollars coming into Poughkeepsie, state dollars, county dollars, and then private dollars. And similar to the state map I just showed you, you can look at it across outcome categories, across service types, around age ranges. And that's the power of what you can do with a fiscal map and the different types of questions that you can ask it. So I'm going to stop my share there and come back to, and like, yes, it is a lot of information. You are going to get these slides, and I'll pause here to say that if you go to our website, you can see an example of all the different types of fiscal maps we've done for different states across the country.
I will
if you
say,
don't,
Kenny,
go
I
ahead,
will say this,
Elizabeth.
on the state maps, we are trying to have some discipline in what we do because we feel like it's very important to have a record across this country that we can use to compare states and their investments. And so we are trying to stay really disciplined on the 0 to 24, using that framework that you just saw in the New Hampshire map to be consistent in what we're tracking across the country. So at the state level, that's what we do. At the local level, if there are, specific areas to drill down and have interest, we are open to doing some of those things.
Which I will add is heroic work to try to keep some framework across the 50 states, which has been
some serious cat herding going on here.
well, and a challenge because we know things like the near yearbook, Massachusetts does not score well, even if you look at other measures, because we don't have a kind of separate pre-K program. And
Right.
it's been very hard to to measure progress in the same way across states?
Yeah, yeah.
I think this is a great stopping point to answer some of these questions in the chat because I'm being cognizant of the time. I want to
Yes.
make sure folks do get some of their questions answered. There's a question here about, do we always look 0 to 24? So as Elizabeth said, at the state level, we're trying to maintain the ability to compare across states. However, at the local level, there are examples of folks doing local fiscal maps with us that look at specific age groups. So for example, we actually just finished up a project in Austin where they were specifically looking at early care and education funding that's landing in Austin. And so it is possible to look at specific age ranges. However, what we do always say is that it makes sense to get all of the information because you can always drill down within a fiscal map to answer specific questions like how much are we spending on early care and education. And frankly, you're going to ask the same people for that same data to get all of the information. So you might as well get all of it when you're doing it.
Right. Kenny, I can go through the chat because I know it's hard to do it all.
I want to make sure we get to the revenue side of things too. So keep going back to your slides, Kenny.
All right.
And so just so so powerful roles that philanthropy can play toward the leverage of the goals. And then Ali answered that in the chat. And then have we started any projects in Mass that would lead to this? We hope that we will get to this. How long does it take to gather the information? And then you mentioned you could include private funding. So those are the kind of the themes of the chat.
Yep. It takes a little while. It takes a little while. And I'd say, you want to give yourselves probably a good 6 months to really get a full state map like this. And then, you can include private funding. It's a totally different methodology and approach that you have to use. And what we tend to find is that the private investments obviously pale in comparison to the public investments writ large. I mean, there's certain areas where private funding is big, but for the most part, it's going to be, under 5% of the total spending on kids. So, okay, Kenny, go.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on fiscal mapping is like we said, we don't have a Massachusetts map, but if you're interested in learning more about the funding streams that are available at the federal level, we do have a federal tool on our website that you can use to look at all the different funding streams that are available for children and youth, just to start to understand what's out there, the world of it. And Ali will put the link to that in the chat as well. So the next part of the process, cost modeling, which is doing the analysis, is understanding the true costs of trying to meet your goals. So I'll give a concrete example that we have done is we worked with the city of Boston on cost modeling, thinking through their universal pre-K planning program that serves 3 and 4-year-olds. What they were specifically trying to understand is the difference of what does it cost to provide this care in center-based care versus school-based care, and the differences that needed to exist within their funding formula to account for those needs. And so part of that process is understanding from providers what the true cost of providing their services is, creating an aggregation of that, which gives you the example of a typical program and allows you to understand what will it cost based upon the things that you ask the question. So you can ask questions like, what if we raised wages and created a minimum wage? What if we provided health insurance? What if we did NACE ratios instead of state ratios? So you can ask questions like that change the different cost drivers and allows you to get to the per child and a per group number. And an important thing to say about cost model is each service delivery type is a different cost model. So looking at school-based, because of the different regulations, would be one cost model. Looking at center-based is a different one. Looking at family childcare would be a different one because each delivery type has different regulations and thus different cost drivers. That helps you get to answer the question of, well, what does it actually cost to do what we're trying to do? And then the last question is this piece about how do you fill the gap, what we call source additional funding. This slide just shows a bunch of the different examples that folks have used, things like federal grants, state budget allocations, foundation dollars, dedicated public funding streams. These are all the different ways that folks have sought to fill the gaps that they've identified through the first 2 parts of the process. I want to highlight here at the bottom here this link to a report that we wrote some years ago that goes really into depth of all these different ideas and the different ways that folks have used them. And so if you have the time to read through it, it's a great way to understand the way that different folks are generating revenue across the country. This is another example of the way that folks have sought to fill the gaps in specifically with state dedicated mechanisms, things like the tobacco and cigarette tax that many are familiar with, the tobacco settlement from the 90s, new funding streams like marijuana taxes, that's becoming legalized across the country, sports betting, which is the thing that am very familiar with, having done this work in Louisiana. Things like that are that really landmark work that happened in New Mexico around the land grant that created an enormous fund. So we're always on the lookout for ideas like this that of new revenue that can be dedicated to support children and youth. I know this is where Elizabeth will probably jump in and say something about the eventual opioid settlements and
Social media.
social media. Yeah. Do you want to say something
Yeah,
about that?
No, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is, again, just like get creative, use every tool in the toolbox to drive resources to this space, because as you all know, it's a very expensive new thing for government to be thinking about investing in. And when you do the cost modeling, you get a scary big number. But I keep saying to people, like, we didn't used to have kindergarten or some high school or, you know, certain things in this country. We need to just start thinking differently about putting, you know, pretty sizable resources toward early childhood in ways that we haven't before. So we have to get creative and just pull everything we can into this space. So that's what we're trying to do.
It's also a good way to show progress. Like, it's so hard to account for everything that's happening sometimes. And we had a lot of policy pass through our state budget this year, which we are all still trying to untangle and think about the implications.
And be counting it and have your little thermometer that says, okay, we did this, and then make sure you keep it there. You don't let it-
Exactly, because it's year to year. Yes.
So this slide talks about a thing that we have helped a lot of communities on, which is the specific idea of a local voter approved children's fund for municipalities that have the ability to establish one of these. And this is a map of all the different places. Like, we haven't worked on all of these, but there's a good number in here that we participated in helping them build and execute their campaigns. A lot of really great wins for kids here. I feel really proud to have been part of the one that's happened in New Orleans that created an ECE fund that is $22 million per year that is eligible for a state match that can take it up to 42 million. My colleagues at Agenda for Children are now in the process of figuring out how to implement a program that has grown from 200 kids to 2,000 kids.
Wow.
So there's that also whole side of the work of, you know, the magnitude that the work can increase and the kids that you can serve over time with something like that. This slide talks about readiness and thinking about what readiness looks like, which is a thing that we talk to folks a lot about, is understanding having the capacity to start and sustain this work. And obviously one of the biggest things is having really clear set of goals and priorities, the strong relationships to get access to the stakeholders and the information you need to actually get this work done. So to be really concrete with that, to do a fiscal map, you've got to have access to budget holders who can verify your data. To do a cost model, you've got to have access to providers who can give you the information on their costs to be able to build the model. So that's two really concrete examples of the relationships you need to have. To set goals, you've got to have a really clear, mature coalition that has coalesced around a set of collective impact goals. And then obviously any past or current ongoing efforts that of any of these three things are really helpful to build on.
Right.
And so when you think about like how ready you are to begin this process, those are the things to start to think about. And then here's a piece of the work that I specifically oversee with my team. If all of that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. And so one of the things that we have thought about is the concept of a children's funding coordinator, which is a person who wakes up every day in your community thinking about this work specifically, because the work is large and varied and human capacity is always at a premium. And so having a person whose job it is to lead and continue and sustain and grow this work through the years can be really key. To date, we have worked with 4 coordinators who are sort of towards the end stage of their time working directly with us in Austin, Cleveland, Montgomery County, and Louisville. 3 of those folks are working specifically on ECE, Austin, Montgomery County, and Louisville. I want to specifically call out Louisville and Austin from some really awesome stuff that they're working on. In Louisville, the children's funding coordinator. Her name is Annette. She works for the mayor's office in Louisville, and she was really key in helping them build out a plan around implementing universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. And they've now spun off a separate 501c3 called Thrive by Five that is working on what does implementation look like over the next 5 to 6 years and figuring out how to fund it. And she was a huge part of building that work. And in Austin, we're really, really excited about this. Her name's Margot. This is where I always tell the joke that I believe in this work so much that I named my first child after our very first coordinator. The reality is that like we had picked the name before we met her, but it was a really great thing that I get to say in calls like this.
Kenny, are you running for office too? What's going on
No,
here?
good Lord, no, 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 no. Really exciting work happening in Austin. Margot did a cost model for them. They're specifically looking at increasing supports for infants and toddlers, looking to eliminate family co-payments, looking to raise the eligibility of families and aligning at 300% of the federal poverty line, and then looking to do something on educator wages. They are heading to the ballot. They actually just last week passed the final procedural hurdle and got a positive vote from their county commissioner to put it on the ballot for the fall. Don't quote me on the number, but I believe the number that they're going for is around $70 million in Austin. And so we're really excited I'm just putting it out there that we're going to win on election day and that Austin's going to have a fund come this fall. By the end of the year, we're going to be working with a host of other communities. So as part of Governor Moore's Enough Act, his Office of Children is hiring a children's funding coordinator to support that work at the state level in Maryland. In Ohio, there's a state level children's funding coordinator that just started working with us, working with an organization called Learn to Earn. And there's also going to be children's funding coordinators working locally in Chattanooga, Poughkeepsie, Marin, California, Muscatine, Iowa, and Tucson. All that work's going to be launching between now and the end of the year. If you would like to talk about what a children's funding coordinator could look like in Massachusetts or in the local community, I would love to talk to anyone who's interested in learning about that. This last page, and again, we're going to share these slides, is a link to a bunch of the resources I've mentioned here. And so just like a place where you can find that information. I think somehow I did that in the allotted time.
Kenny, you did, man. It's 10 o'clock on the nose. We still have a minute, which is about 24 hours here on the 9:30 call. And while I'm the host of the 9:30 call, I'm not supposed to have favorites. Man, this was a really good call, Kenny and Elizabeth. The chat has been on fire. I just want to say out loud that we want to lead this in Massachusetts. And I think lots of people are interested in the chat. Marissa, I'm going to turn things over to you, just because we're thinking about this as part of the early childhood agenda and work group 6. So Marissa, why don't you, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Kenny and Elizabeth, so much. This has been a really great call. And as Amy mentioned, we'll share the chat with you both. And then I think everyone's really excited to have the slides too. So if you didn't feel like you processed everything in that rapid fire 29-minute call, then don't worry, you'll have some time to digest it after the call too. And then, yeah, I just wanted to briefly just say the early childhood agenda work group 6, which is focusing on local infrastructure and partnerships, was really interested in this idea of strategic public financing, and then the early childhood coordinators especially. So if you want to dig into this a little more, you can come to our meeting today, which is at 3 p.m. I believe. So we're meeting later today. Otherwise, I think we're going to try and set up a call with, if you want to put your information in the chat and you're interested in sort of partnering with us or thinking about next steps, we can set up a call with kind of the interested parties and start to talk about what this could look like in Massachusetts.
And we have flagged it for EEC, right? I mean, we're just coming out of the budget, so they've been very busy, but I think we do think this could be a huge resource at the state level. We appreciate this, like, gotta know what's happening at the state to think about local. We know local communities in Massachusetts have already started moving on some of these pieces. But to Elizabeth, kind of in your opener, like these questions, the 3 that you highlighted are the ones that come up. And usually nobody knows the answer. So we are so excited.
Shocking, right? It seems like we should.
We should, right? We're like, why is this so hard? There was also Kim Lucas asked about higher ed, if there's opportunities for higher ed to partner. So I guess if you have like 30 seconds on that, and what has that looked like in other places that you've worked? Like,
sorry,
for higher ed, like to be like at the house of like data or analysis. Or
Yeah. Actually, one of our key partners on the state fiscal mapping partnership across the country is University of Missouri St. Louis, and we've built up a little team of fiscal mappers there that are running through state budgets all over the place. So we're more than happy to, as long as universities know we don't pay a ton of overhead. um, we're more than happy to work with university partners.
Great. Well, Elizabeth and Kenny, here in sleepy August 22nd, I think you've lit a fire here in Massachusetts. We'll send you the chat. We will go through the chat. If you put people, we're here every day. So if people want to continue to connect with us, we are recording this call so folks can share this with other folks. And as Marissa said, join work group number 6. As we think, yes, Kate Warren Barnes, thank you for the 3 fire emojis. But let me go up to Kate Warren Barnes's, because there was a lot of, Kate said, super interested in the context of shifting money from mandated reporters to mandated supporters that meet the maternal economic needs of children and families. So why don't we leave that there? Kenny and Elizabeth, I mean, welcome to the 9:30 call, and thank you so much. We would love to have you kind of back as we think about, you know, whether it's work group 6, or just thinking about how we can work together in Massachusetts.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you so much for having us. The last thing I'll say before I let you guys go is just 2 things I think folks should be really interested in. Is we did a webinar, our fiscal mapping team, on the 14 state maps that were part of our wave 1. So if you want to dive more into the methodology and what we looked at, that webinar can be found on our website. And myself and my team, we did a webinar with the first 4 coordinators talking about their backgrounds and their organizations and what they're working on and what their goals are. So if you want to dive more into the specific work of the coordinators, there's also a webinar on our website around that.
And just want to acknowledge kind of all of your direct service work, and like, even for someone who's been working with 3s and 4s and 5s, to see, like, you know, another kind of career path for you to now be doing this fiscal mapping, but that understanding, because we know that the burden of so much of this usually falls on people in programs or family child providers that are trying to figure all this out at their program level without the support of the infrastructure. So just want to acknowledge that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I hope that Margot has a good day when she arrives for work at 10 o'clock.
Tell her I want that document stat.
All right, today's Thursday, so we'll be back on Monday for the 9:30 call. Thank you so much for joining us, especially if you tuned in from vacation. I don't know whether to celebrate that or cry about that, but we will see you next week. Have a great day.